So welcome again, everyone, to the December meeting of the Whiteaker Community Council. My name is Ian Winbrock, and I'm the chair. And tonight we have some great speakers from the city of Eugene who are going to talk to us about the housing that we're providing our unhoused neighbors at Washington Jefferson Park and the city's plans to help transition them to more permanent, supportive, and stable housing, as well as Eric DeBoard, who is going to be talking with us about how we can better work together for tree maintenance, planting new trees, and working together on communication when we need to remove ones who are diseased and need to be taken away for safety. So tonight, before we get started, I did want to say that we're going to have an opportunity for public comment for everyone who's here who are members of the Whiteaker Community Council or live outside of the Whiteaker to be able to speak publicly before we transition to our speakers. But there's a couple of different ways tonight that you can voice your interest in participating to speak. Before I do that, I wanted to pass it over to our Vice Chair Gail to give us some instructions on how to kind of change your computer audio so that you can really speak up tonight and have your voice heard. Gail?
Thank you, Ian. You probably are tired of hearing me say this, but up here in the corner of your screen, there should be a button that says Original Sound Off. If you press that, it will change and say Original Sound On. If you choose that, we will be more easily able to hear you because it will make your microphone more directional. Phone apps sometimes are missing that, and if you don't have it, don't worry about it. It's not critical. It's just a nice little way to hear better. Also, I'm going to ask again that everybody please be very responsible with your microphones and make certain that when you're not speaking, you have your microphone muted, just so that background noise in your room or in your house or your ringing phone doesn't distract us from listening to the people who are speaking. And other than that, welcome to the Whiteaker Community Council. I'm very happy to be here tonight. I said a little earlier I will not be able to stay for the whole meeting, but I am excited to see as much as I can, and I hope you all have a great meeting.
Thanks so much, Gail. And we've already got your first question for you. So Claire and Angie are showing us how to voice your interest in participating. So one of the ways you can voice your interest is by raising your virtual hand, which we'll talk about in just a second. Delinea also has her virtual hand up, but I know that Claire has a question and then Angie might as well before we move on for the different ways you can voice your interest in participating. Claire?
Yeah, Gail, out of curiosity, what kind of computer program do you use? Because I've never seen the blue box that you've talked about all of this whole time. I've just been so mystified and I've never said anything. So this is me saying something.
I am running the app on a laptop, and it's not blue, it's black. So there's a little light in the corner that says recording, and it has a little red button. And then to the right of that, I have a bar that says original sound, and you can kind of select a microphone there, but it has an option. I think some apps have it and some apps don't, and I'm honestly baffled as to why it isn't everywhere, because it does.
I must not have it. Yeah, I'm fascinated.
Yeah,
but maybe I don't know.
But I can hear you great, so maybe you don't need it. Maybe you just have a super smart computer that knows how to do it automatically.
And Kelly and Eric, there will be a Zoom quiz at the end of this, so please remember to take notes during your time here at the Whiteaker Community Council. Angie, you are up next.
Hi, everyone. I am secretary for Whiteaker Community Council. I will probably be messaging some of you to say, hi, do you live, own, or work or volunteer in the Whiteaker? If so, I need your name and an email address to contact you for eligibility to vote in our election. So check your chat box.
Sweet. Thanks for that, Angie. Really appreciate you mentioning that. And we have some folks here who are on the board of directors and some folks here who are general members. So I just wanted to say that the Whiteaker Community Council serves multiple functions. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which serves the Whiteaker community through our community development, economic development, health and safety, and other activities. And we also serve as one of Eugene's 23 recognized neighborhood associations, which gives us a couple of opportunities to provide feedback to the city through a process which has existed since 1974, as well as a bit of funding to reach out to community members who live, work, or own property in the neighborhood. I wanted to talk next about the ways you can voice your interest in participating in the conversation. The first is by raising your physical hand. So that's going to be a signal to me, since I'm going to be the one facilitating the conversation tonight, that you have an interest in speaking. I'm not super great at recognizing when everyone's physical hand is raised. So another way that you can voice your interest in participating is by virtually raising your hand. And Thea, thanks so much for doing that. What Thea has done is raise her virtual hand, and in my screen, she pops up in the upper left-hand corner. So that's a fantastic way to voice your interest in participating, because it shows me that you want to talk. The third way is by, if you're using a phone, by saying your name. So I will pick on Susan tonight. If Susan was calling in on the phone, she would just say Susan, and that would be my interest. Hi, Susan. That would be her voicing her interest in participating. And then the last way, and probably the most effective way, is by using the Zoom chat function. So for every Zoom interface, it looks different. For some people, they might have a button on the bottom that says chat. For others, they might be using a phone for Zoom. And so whatever function it is, I would just say, please put into the chat that you have an interest in speaking. I'll pick on Angie. If Angie sends a message in the group to everyone, hey, I want to talk, I'll let people know Angie's in the queue, and then I'll let people know what the speaking order is. And so for this, Jen beat Angie to the punch. And so I would say the speaking order is Jen first, and then Angie would be on deck. She would be the second person to speak. So those are the 4 different ways you can voice your interest in participating. But I first wanted to do something a little different and showcase to y'all just a very quick overview of what the Whiteaker Community Council is and what we do. Can people give me a little hand raise or a thumbs up if you can see the slide there? Perfect. Okay, so I just wanted to give a kind of quick overview about who we are. Who we are, well, we're your neighbors. The Whiteaker Community Council, like I said, has this dual function of being a nonprofit organization and a neighborhood association. And wouldn't you know it, we're the people who you see at Red Barn, we're the people who shop with you at the Whiteaker Farmers Market, we're at the park with you, we're walking our dogs, we're riding our bikes, we're having a little bit too much to drink at Slice before we do karaoke, but we live, work, and play with you. We're the people that you know and see every day, and we work together to make the Whiteaker a better place to live, work, and play. What you can see here is a couple of board members, past and present. The board members are directly elected by the people that we serve. Folks who live, work, or own property in the Whiteaker neighborhood, and our board is entirely made up of us, your neighbors. You can see on that bus some pictures of other neighbors we have, Gloria and Akone, who own Equiano Coffee, on bus ads that we've been putting out since July of last year as part of our COVID campaign to reduce infection and transmission of COVID in our community. But we do a lot more than just public health work. And so what do? Well, we help each other out. As part of our COVID work, we've been hosting vaccine clinics that have become wellness clinics where we provide community members, whether they live in the Whiteaker or not, access to critical health care. So here's a former Whiteaker resident getting his booster vaccine. But since, March of this year, we've vaccinated over 850 people in partnership with Walgreens, Lane County Public Health, and our current vaccination partner, Whitebird. In addition to that, we have board members and volunteers who provide hand sanitizer free of charge to local businesses in the Whiteaker to make sure that local businesses can stay successful and they don't need to spend time or money focusing on ways for our communities to stay safe. Another way that we commit and provide support to our community members is during some of the hottest days this summer, we opened up cooling centers in partnership with another nonprofit, and we sent out meals as well as hydration supplies, coconut water, Gatorade water, to some of our unhoused neighbors living at Washington Jefferson Park that we're going to hear from a little bit later today. And then last but not so least is we also know that nourishment doesn't just come from the stuff we eat and drink, but also it comes from art. So the Whiteaker Community Council has an arts committee, and we put out a monthly art walk. This is the art walk map from November, where we let folks in the community know where they can access free visual and performing arts each month on the last Friday. And we don't just put out the map, we actually fund local artists too. So this was a fun, socially distanced performing arts event in someone's backyard. We don't have any formal galleries. Actually, we have one now, the Hybrid Lounge, which is super cool. And they have a pretty sweet show going on called Renaissance. It's going to be showing later this month on the 31st of December during our last art walk of this year. But we also provide modest amounts of funding to local performing and visual artists for impromptu performances on the last Friday of the month. So how do we make stuff happen? Well, we do it with our committees that you can join if you're interested in it. Our Public Health and Safety Committee is led by Anand, one of our longstanding board members. Social Justice is led by Angie, our secretary. Whiteaker Community Art Team is led by myself. And then our Transportation Committee, some of our Transportation Committee co-founders, Claire, Dan, and Andrew, just started that this year, and all of them are open to the public. And if you want to get more involved, you can just shoot us a message in the chat and we'll let you know when our committees happen. I would say get involved. If any of these issues are interesting to you, or you want to be able to make your neighborhood a better place to live, work, and play, come join us. We're doing tons of great work, and it's all because of folks like you. So with that, I wanted to open it up to public comment. So our public comment tonight is part of our agenda, and really we want to hear from you. What's important to you? Do you have anything to share with the neighborhood? Do you have anything that you think we as a community council should prioritize? Because this is something that's truly important to us. We want to be able to have a deeper understanding of what's the most important things in the neighborhood, and what you feel that we should be focusing on. Because the Whiteaker Community Council only works because of you, because of your priorities, what you think that we should be doing and how we should be working. So I wanted to open it up now to members of the public, to board members, or some of our illustrious city employees who are here for any announcements or things that they wanted to share. So if you're interested in sharing, please shoot up your hand, raise your virtual hand, or send me a message in the chat, and I will put you in the queue. Looks like Thea's first. Thea, go right on ahead.
Hi, everyone. I am the Park and Safety Person liaison for Whiteaker Community Council, and I work with Chief Skinner and a lot of our businesses, and Kelly McIver. Hi, Kelly. And our businesses are struggling right now with some of the people that are not living in the park anymore, but are living out in front. And some of the trash that is piling up has become excessive. So I call Kelly or send him a text and say, we need help. And the businesses need our support, just so you know. It's been really, really rough. And then I also want to let you know, Doriandra handed me the check. I went to Red Apple and picked that up. And Red Apple said to tell everyone, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for the community support that the Whiteaker Community Council and the community has given them, because it has been rough over the last several years. So they just wanted to say thank you. And the chief and I did not have an opportunity to do an update yesterday. He's been dealing with things that have been happening at the high schools and guns and things like that, and also some issues in our neighborhood. But he's working to try and find a solution for Stephen, who's been living in front of Nelson's. And he's been working with Kelly, I believe, and other people. So we're trying to find some solution for that. All right. And if you have any questions, you can always shoot me a text or email me. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Thea. Margaret, did I see your hand up? It might have been you reaching for a cat. Okay, it looks like you.
It was my cat reaching for me.
I see, yeah.
Being demanding, but thank you.
Totally. Great. Well, does anyone else have a public comment? Otherwise, we'll move on to Kelly McIver. Okay.
Ian, you yell go when it's when you want me to start.
Go. Actually, I have a flare gun for just this specific purpose. And just remember, Kelly, that there's no smiling or making jokes of any kind. Please be as straight as possible.
I understand.
You will be judged by yes. This evening, we're really lucky to be joined by Kelly McIver. Kelly, if I butcher your title, that's a hobby of mine, so I apologize in advance. Kelly's the communications manager for the City of Eugene's unhoused response, and he's situated in the city manager's office. As a lot of you may know, we've always been a place for our unhoused neighbors to feel safe. I feel like that's a feature, not a bug. I think that over the pandemic, our neighborhood has really been the community which has been disproportionately impacted the most. And there's certainly a history of the Whiteaker taking a disproportionate burden of the needs of our unhoused residents. I think we're super fortunate to be joined by Kelly to share a little bit about what the city's been doing in its own structure to be able to reorganize in order to provide services and be able to structure services more effectively, but also talk about the city's most recent efforts to stand up safe sleep sites. We're all familiar with our microsites and the Conestoga huts that have been placed here in the Whiteaker, but the safe sleep sites seem to me like a departure from the city's past responses to our unhoused and our housing crisis. So really excited to hear from Kelly, get an update on the city's kind of new operation structure, as well as the safe sleep sites, and then also to talk about Washington Jefferson Park itself and the efforts the city is doing to be able to transition folks who are living in the park to safe sleep sites and other opportunities to get safe and stable housing. And so Kelly, I just wanted to remind you that butchering people's titles is kind of a pastime of mine. So with that, I wanted to pass it to you, and let me look for that flare gun so I can say go. Thanks so much for joining.
Sounds good. Yeah, so you failed miserably on your hobby of butchering titles. You actually nailed it perfectly, which nobody has a right to do because it sounds so awkward and made up. But thank you for that. And just a little bit, very little bit about me. Thea knows me. We've had some really good conversations. I do have some past in the Whiteaker neighborhood. I used to own a house on the corner of 4th and Polk, kind of kitty corner down across the street from David and Kitty Piercy for a number of years. And then I also worked for 12 years at 4J down at the admin building there, 200 North Monroe. So I've spent a whole lot of time in the Whiteaker neighborhood, and I unabashedly have a very soft spot for it. So I don't mind in my current role, because we know that there is no way that we can kind of provide completely equitable or efficient services in trying to manage our homelessness crisis out there. And so I actually don't mind kind of throwing a little bit of extra weight when I can, which isn't always, but to try to get attention on some of the things happening in the Whiteaker neighborhood, because I do believe it is one of the most authentic, old school, vibrant neighborhoods in our city. Maybe more so than any other. I've lived in places all over the city, and there was never any place that felt quite as neighborhoody as the Whiteaker the time that I lived there. So I do think it's a super important thing that we try to maintain that culture, to not take advantage of the tolerant, temperate nature of neighbors there, and their concern for broader issues and all of their neighbors and community members, by letting things slide in kind of a health and safety way and quality of life way that affects everybody. So that's our goal. I realize that we don't meet that goal often currently. We are really behind on all of this, and I won't argue that at all. I do want to provide a little bit of an update and a little bit of information on, as Ian mentioned, on kind of how we are doing things at the city now. So as the homelessness crisis developed, as you could imagine, there was kind of a scattershot approach that happened for quite some time, because there was so much work that touched on so many different departments at the city. There were people from Public Works going out and doing cleanup. There were people from parking services going out and addressing unsanctioned camping on the streets. And there were people from police addressing safety issues and security issues that were being created. And then, of course, there were folks who worked with, kind of the Lane County portions of Health and Human Services, who are trying to provide assistance to people who need it, who are unhoused. Well, a few months ago, the city very smartly, I can say this is before I came on to the city in August, but they very smartly decided to coordinate all of this. And so earlier this year, they got together and kind of established a unified command approach. It's similar to what would happen in kind of a disaster response scenario. So if people are familiar with, the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the things that you see happen in a community after a wildfire or an earthquake or something like that, you implement what's called an incident command system. You have a structure that's set up to really focus on getting certain things done. And you have a whole bunch of people brought in to take care of those things. And they may work in all kinds of different departments and lines of work in their daily work. But when they are reporting to that structure, they have very specialized functions that are just about getting things done on that topic. And that's what the city has been doing in a way to try to coordinate all of this better. So we try to learn and grow with that every day. We are working as much as we can together on how to do responses for this. And the attempt has been to try to have a balanced response of doing outreach, enhancing the outreach that is out there for people with social service backgrounds to be able to actually grow those numbers, get those folks out into the streets and get them out into the unsanctioned campgrounds, and work with the unhoused members of our community to assess their needs, to try to get them linked up with services that can help them exit homelessness, get them assistance with health, medical services, mental health services, recovery, economic assistance, different kinds of things like that that are going to help them. And at the same time, we also have teams that are trying to address the health and safety issues that are prevalent in the community. So we have to be humane and good neighbors and community members, but at the same time, try to uphold a standard that is going to affect the entire city and the entire community. So we're trying to balance those things. It doesn't always work. It sometimes falls out of balance one way or the other, but we really are trying. The temporary camp at Washington Jefferson Park was created largely in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to provide shelter in place options to try to slow or stop the spread of the virus. And then also be responsive to some of the changes in state law that happened that required us to approach those kinds of camping situations in a little different way. So that was how the camp was stood up, also recognizing that that is a place that people had gone to begin doing unsanctioned camping anyway. We have tried to manage that camp. We do have criteria in place for the people who stay there. Earlier this year, the camp was transitioned to a gridded system where every camp space occupies a 12-foot by 12-foot space with 12 feet in between. That, of course, helps also with the COVID-19 precautions and also allows for basically being able to keep a better handle on how many folks are there, where the camp spaces are located, who is where, able to get providers in to see different people and know who is seeing who, and also provide access more easily for emergency services and also just maintenance services in the park. So that was set up steadily over time. We have seen the numbers go down there. And that is because the people there, the folks that are leaving are the camps, the spaces that are unable to maintain compliance with the temporary camp criteria that we have. There's some pretty basic rules that are in place focused on health and safety. Folks are given many opportunities to come into compliance with that. They're given regular kind of reminders and urging by park staff there about that. We really do, even though ultimately we want to transition these folks to a safe sleep site and to close that situation down and return the park to its traditional use, we've also wanted folks to be able to stay there and maintain in that place because frankly, there are some benefits to them being together there rather than spread out in other places in the community. And we would love for them to be able to comply with the rules, stay there. That just hasn't been possible. And we have decided it was important to have some kind of a standard for that. And so gradually we have seen numbers decrease as people have been unable to meet those criteria. I will be very honest with you. Our assumption is that most of those people who have left the park, the ones who have essentially proven that for one reason or another, they're not able to kind of comply with those basic standards, are then moving to do unsanctioned camping in the nearby vicinity. So I'm not going to mince words about that at all. That is a concern that we have, a thing that is affecting the Whiteaker neighborhood because people are leaving the park and then they are going to do either street camping or camping in the right of way in different places throughout the community. And then that results in the city needing to come through and do various kinds of enforcement to try to clean those spaces up, to move people along from places where it is just not healthy or safe for them to be. And that is something that just takes a whole lot of effort. And as you can probably see from having been out on the streets and in the neighborhood there, it is not as effective as we would like it to be, but that is where we are. So we are still in a place of trying to get our safe sleep sites stood up. I do have a little bit of good news to share on that front. at least in that the one safe sleep site that we have opened at 310 Garfield Street, that was a site that is exclusively for vehicle camping. We were very quickly able to fill that up to its max of about 55 vehicles. We have served so far year to date a total of about 90 people at that site. So that's 90 people who have basically exited unsanctioned camping situations on the streets of Eugene and moved into that site, and then have been able to start receiving assistance from social service providers. We have had, I believe, 3 people who have been able to exit that location and then move on to more established shelter and get back on the pathway to exiting homelessness entirely. We had one person who was able to get life-saving surgery because he was now at a location where his follow-up care could actually come and check in with him. So he was able to get a surgery scheduled that would save his life. We have had another person who was a first-time person experiencing homelessness, had lost her job, and has been able to get a new job and is now working toward getting an apartment and exiting homelessness. So we're seeing some success in that program, and St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County has been a fantastic partner in that site and in managing it and providing really good care for those unhoused members of our community, just as St. Vincent de Paul does with many of the other programs that are operated locally. They also will be the operator for the adjacent site yet to be opened at 410 Garfield, and that will be a site that is largely indoors. So there's a very large structure there, used to be kind of a warehousing situation. That is being adapted to be able to hold up to around 90 tent or small shelter sites, and then also some vehicle camping space outside on the paved areas of that site. That is the one that we are most focused on trying to get ready as quickly as possible. We are still a little ways out on it, and it has definitely not come as quickly as we had hoped it would. We've learned a lot in this process, and everything to do with identifying the land for safe sleep sites and the process of standing them up, getting the service providers contracted and ready to provide services and operate those sites, and then also to do the development of the sites themselves to make sure that they are safe for people to occupy. And that's a piece that it's difficult for people to understand, even people on our own team, that you might think, well, you've got people camping in a park. And in some locations, it's pretty swampy. The location, the temporary camp over at 13th Avenue is pretty swampy. People are outside. Why can't you just get them onto this site and hurry it up? And the answer is really because when you start doing something like this, and it's the city doing it, you still have to follow some basic laws and rules around codes for taking human beings and putting them in a place and making sure it's going to be safe. So there are fire code things, there are occupancy things that we have to be doing with that site just to make it legal and safe for those folks to be in. We're trying to get that done absolutely as soon as possible and get them moved in there. So as soon as we have that site open, we will be taking people, the remaining folks from the 13th Avenue camp and many from the Washington Jefferson camp and moving them onto that site. We have another safe sleep site that is in development. Again, hopefully we'll be opening soon in the next few months over on Danny Street in West Eugene, and that will accommodate about 30 folks. So again, we're hoping to quickly get those up. We have after that another site that will be opening probably in very early spring or maybe even a little before then. That should accommodate 20 or so people. So we are again really focused on trying to get all the folks who are remaining in Washington Jefferson and 13th Avenue, the temporary camps there, moved on to those safe sleep sites, and then be able to be there and then to begin receiving services from social service providers and getting the assistance they need to try to exit homelessness. The rub is that the people who have exited those camps, as I said, who have not been able to follow those temporary camp criteria, those are the folks that are more questionable about their ability to ever be able to move into sites like that. The people who are remaining there have really demonstrated that they are ready and willing and eager to get that assistance and move into those sites. It will remain a community challenge about how we manage the folks that have exited those temporary camps and the people that may be out there who never have been at the temporary camps, and to, again, try to get that outreach built up, to get out there, assess their needs, find out their readiness and willingness to receive assistance, as well as the capacity to provide the assistance, and then deal with the unsanctioned camping situations that are out there. And the priority is always going to be the situations that have the biggest negative health and safety impacts. So in cases where people are able to maintain some sort of a camping situation where it is not creating some sort of a health and safety issue, blocking the right of way like sidewalks and streets and access, causing security or just health risks to the neighborhood and other people out there, those folks, I don't want to say that it's not sanctioned, it's not allowed, but that is not the priority. The folks who can maintain and be low profile and not create issues and safety and health and safety problems, those folks aren't the issue. The issue is the folks who are really creating a lot of health and safety problems in our communities, and we've seen it in the Whiteaker as well. So that is the challenge, to be able to go around and deal with that as quickly as we can, as effectively as we can, and of course, needing to make sure that we do all of that legally and fairly as well. And that's been our big challenge recently. So I think that kind of takes us up to speed. Ian, please dive back in and redirect me on some of the things that you wanted to have covered. And I'm always happy to take questions too.
Yeah, thanks so much. We've got quite a few questions. So I'm not going to read the order right now, but we've got Margaret first and then Anand second. Margaret had a quick question about your role as an incident commander and about the incident command structure. So Margaret, feel free to go first. And then Anand is going second because Anand has to take off a little bit early, but I'll post the queue for questions in just a moment. Margaret?
Right, and I'll try to make this quick. I actually wrote down a couple questions during the listening. So from what I understand, and I understand what an incident commander is, that's you, Kelly, is that correct?
That is definitely not correct. I am what would be called a public information officer. So my role is communications. So I work under it's a joint unified command that is the director of the city's public works department and the assistant city manager. They are the unified commanders for our effort.
Okay, so I would just a couple things. How are you prioritizing what sanctioned campsites get into the safe sleep sites first? Because there's a few of them around town.
Well, the ones that we are focused on for the next available, as soon as the next safe sleep sites are stood up, the temporary campers at 13th Avenue and Washington Jefferson Park are the absolute priority.
Okay, and do you all work with the mission at all? Are you aware that they've changed their whole setup as far as what they're doing? They're allowing people to come in that are on drugs or alcohol. They give them 14 days to get dry, help them through some type of recovery. They have 40 empty beds, the last I heard.
So the social service providers that we work with, so the folks in the community, typically those folks are connected with Lane County that oversees a lot of those services and provides pass-through funding for that. But the people that do that kind of line level outreach to our unhoused community members, they are typically very aware of kind of the availability of different services and whatever the barriers may be with those different options that are out there. So that's part of our challenge, is getting the number of outreach people to be able to connect and then find out, okay, is this a good option? If we've got a space over here and this is a good fit, can we get this person in there as quickly as possible? So whenever we can do that and reduce the number of people who might need to be at a safe sleep site instead, that's definitely something that we want to do.
So you don't know for sure if they're working directly with the mission or not?
I know that the social service providers are. So,
Okay.
so again, the people who are typically involved in the actual kind of the act of placing people, they are working with the mission as well as with the other shelter programs that are out there.
And I had the same question that Anand did about mental issues. I have a few people that have contacted me with problems that they're having, but I will let him ask. And thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Margaret. Anand, you are next, and then Delinia, you are on deck. Anand?
Thanks, Ian. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for all that you and the city are doing. I'm very happy that you guys are following the dictates of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and making sure that the unhoused people aren't being moved unnecessarily and spreading the infection. And you guys are really great at making the space between them. And as you described, that's great. Thank you very much. Now, according to the point in time count, only about a third of the people who are unhoused actually have a mental health condition, including substance abuse, that are contributing to their being unhoused. That means really two-thirds of them are really unhoused just because they can't afford housing. So I'm wondering, what's actually being done to address the real root cause, which is the lack of affordable housing?
So that's an area where I'm not nearly as astute to be able to talk about it, but I do know that there is an entire effort related with some of the folks at the city, but largely our colleagues at Lane County, working on kind of an entire continuum of trying to beef up the available affordable housing. And it's really, there's a whole arc, a whole track of trying to find things where people can be slotted in at the level that is most appropriate for them. So it's well recognized that we need to beef up the amount of available housing, from basic emergency shelter like a safe sleep site situation to the slightly more well-developed kind of programmatic setting of the rest stops, on to some of the other structured services that are out there, and then ultimately on to formats of affordable housing where people can get into apartments and things like that in ways that they can afford and maintain. So it's definitely something that is being worked on. That is part of the kind of our joint governmental efforts around this issue to work on that and to increase those opportunities at the same time that we've got other folks who are kind of dealing directly with that challenge of how do we get people off the streets into a safe situation, and then also try and make our streets and neighborhoods safe from the kind of the unintended spillover consequences.
Sure, that's great. And I really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Kelly. Having said that, we're talking about thousands of people needing housing, and just trying to find available slots isn't going to do it. We need to build the housing. Who's going to do that? The private sector is not going to. It's not profitable. The municipalities, the cities, and the county have to do that. Who's going to bite the bullet and actually build it?
So what I'd like to do is, because I think it's a great question, it's one that I am not prepared well to talk about, but what I'd love to do is to go back to some of my colleagues who work directly with that question and have them come and present at a future meeting, or otherwise maybe pass information through Ian that can go out to your group that would explain that better than I can.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. Have a very nice day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Anand. We've got Delinia up right now, and then Thea, you're on deck. Delinia?
Hi, Kelly. So here at the Whiteaker Community Council, we've had to think outside the box and, update a lot of the things that we're doing. To me, it seems almost ridiculous not to have a mobile resource center. When I say mobile resource center, is going out to even those unsanctioned camps and getting them signed up for services and getting them signed up to get their IDs and things like that. We're starting to see the ones who are moving out of those camps. It's like they were saying, there are a lot of mentally ill people who are just moving from place to place. So to me, like, what is the city? I hear a lot of stuff, but I don't really hear you guys evolving into what they need, the homeless people need.
So it's a great question. The city's role is a little bit different in this. So typically, and it's the case here in Lane County as well, is that municipal governments are not, that's not part of their purview to provide those kinds of services. So that is Lane County's role. The city is stepping in this case because there is an obvious issue, and a lot of it has to do with kind of basic operational situations with people being out on the streets. There isn't the organizational, in some cases, the funding capacity at the county to be able to do things like organize emergency camps or create these safe sleep sites. Lane County, however, is the one that is responsible for the actual provision and management of those services. And so there is service provider outreach that is happening at the temporary camps and at other locations throughout the city. So that is happening. It is not with a single like a bookmobile type of unit that goes around and people spill out all at one time. Because of the way that the whole system is structured, it is a number of different providers in our community who are getting funding from the county that go out and do that work. So they are already doing that. I'm not sure about like what their levels of penetration are. Clearly, it is very challenging when you're talking about individuals who are suffering from mental health situations to be able to have an effective ongoing relationship with them. They try their best with that. It is extremely challenging to get a foothold and for them to be able to work with them over the long term, to get placements for them and reconnect with them because they often don't have the capacity to kind of track with that, and they're not often staying in one place for an extended period of time. But that is part of their work. They're going out and doing that. And we're trying to get, as I said, more and more people involved in that. It's something that all of our local governmental agencies and the social service agencies have all identified, that we have a tremendous need to expand our pool of people who can go out and do that frontline outreach work. And so I'm very hopeful that we'll have more of that.
Instead of having like and I apologize for interrupting, I'm just, to me, it's evolving into something that the people need. And right now, they don't need a bunch of services that are stationary, paying for a building, paying for water, paying for light, paying for somebody to come in. And then these people are out on the streets. And now I have to, if I'm homeless, I have to have somebody either watch my stuff all day long so I can go out and get these services. So why doesn't the city and Lane County like do the same thing, evolve into something that the people need, or at least get that conversation started?
Like I say, my understanding, and this would be another great question that I can get to our county partners who can speak better about both the affordable housing arc, but also certainly how the service provision piece works. My understanding is that those service providers are going out into those camp locations and onto the streets and meeting with people and doing service provision there. So they're offering medical treatment, they are offering meals, they are offering counseling, they're offering the kinds of things that would be able to gather information to assess their readiness for different kinds of things to pull them out of homelessness. That they are going out and doing those things in the field as opposed to just waiting in a brick and mortar facility for people to come to them. So I hear what you're saying, but I believe that they are already doing that to a large extent. And it's that we need more people available and more of those folks doing that outreach work so the penetration can be greater.
Thank you.
Thanks for the conversation. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation when it's my turn. But I did want to make sure that the folks who have been waiting in the queue have a chance to speak. So pardon me stalling. I just wanted to make sure that we stay in order. Thea, you are currently up, and then we'll be going to Jen after you. Thea?
I saw Claire's name in front of mine. Claire, are you still speaking? Yeah.
No, I took myself out.
Okay. So Kelly, once again, thank you for being here. We've got all these different service providers. County's mostly responsible. The city's trying to pick up the slack. I mean, at least that's what I've seen for years. They're trying to clean up what the county's not doing. Chamber of Commerce came out with a huge report that we have all these different providers and no one's talking to each other. Is there somewhere in the mix, are we getting the mental health services? So this is a two-part question. Are we getting the mental health services and the social services starting to talk to one another? I've been talking with Chief Skinner about getting social workers in the EPD cars with him so that when they come across someone who is mentally ill and is struggling, they can say, hey, this is how we can get this person. Let's see if we can help them. Go back to the old model from the 1970s. I know that's crazy, but a lot of cities did that then because Cahoots is so short-staffed, they can't do it. And also, we've got all these people that don't want to follow the rules on our streets. So how long are we supposed to wait? Because the example I gave of Stephen and Jesus, who's been at Nelson's, has been there for 3 weeks. We have drug issues, we have prostitution issues, we have open fires, and we call it in. How many times and how long should our businesses and should we wait as neighbors for the illegal behaviors? I'm not talking about, we have some great campers that live in the neighborhood that they're our neighbors, but then we have the people that aren't playing by the rules. So those are my 2 questions.
Well, so for the first one, I'm going to put that in the basket with the good ideas and questions to pass on to the folks that know more about kind of those service provider methods and what's being done with that, because it sounds like a great idea to me. I think that there's always going to be issues. Having some background in working with law enforcement, there's always going to be issues with people doing like a ride along kind of thing on an ongoing basis, but there is a lot of creative work that they can do with that. I mean, we've seen it with Cahoots. It sounds like a good idea to me. I think it's a good thing to ask some of the folks that do that work and say, hey, what's being talked about with this? How can we sync these things up a little bit better and at least be making whatever effect and movement that we can get when people are going out on these calls. As to the other one, I mean, the should is that like it should be immediate. It's clearly not. I mean, you shouldn't have to wait 3 weeks with that. And that is something that we are struggling with figuring out. How can we process the information that we're getting from the people out in the community who are dutifully putting in their reports about the things that they're seeing that are affecting the health and safety conditions in their communities? And then how can we coordinate our responses to those in ways that aren't making people wait forever and that are actually effective? And that is where we could do a lot better. I will say that because I've now worked with them for 4 months, I will say that people are working as hard as they can, and there's definitely there is no lack of interest or effort in providing the service. Sometimes we're up against things with just the capacity of the number of people who are available to go out and do the work. Sometimes the conditions are such that we've got to have a law enforcement support because, maybe we're dealing with an individual that has a history of violence or making threats to city workers who have come out to do their work around those people. And so we have to have law enforcement support available with that. And sometimes that's a challenge given their staffing capacity issues. So there's a lot that goes into it, but we definitely, I believe, can do, and we're trying to do a better job with coordinating those things so that we can get all the folks together that need to be out there, and that we're also taking a look at how can we leverage whatever kind of code and other options are available to us to most quickly and effectively deal with some of these issues. Because clearly, like when you have piles of things that to any reasonable observer would be seen as, it's blocking the right of way, it's blocking streets, or it's blocking sidewalks and preventing people of any mobility level, let alone the most vulnerable of our neighbors who have serious mobility issues, from getting through an area. But what's there is clearly something that is refuse. I mean, it may have some value to someone who has a mental health condition because they've assembled it, but it is not something that is helping them survive. It is not an organized camp situation. How can we get in and get that situation dealt with more effectively? And that's a question that we're trying to get answered. And you know, I do thank Thea and other folks in the community who will be, you know, very respectful, but also very persistent in sharing that information, because sometimes, like I had alluded to before, you know, we've got people deployed all over the city kind of working hard on this, but sometimes, you know, it needs to tip the balance so that we get a little bit more attention in an area that really needs it. And I'm happy to provide that. And that happens at different times and at different places across the community. And so that's what we ask people to do is, you know, turn up the heat a little bit, give us that information on the consistent basis, let us know how long it's been. And sometimes we can get the right resources pulled together to be able to do that. The gold standard would be, you don't have to do that, it's just happening. But where we are right now with our amount of staffing, and the issues that we have all over the community, we just can't be as efficient as we'd like.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that answer. And we're going to be moving on to Jen next. And I just wanted to remind everyone that you're more than welcome to jump back into the queue. After Jen, we have Dan and then myself. But really quickly, before we go to Jen, we had a question in the chat, Brian, from Claire regarding maybe a summation or just a couple of bullet points from that meeting today, for that joint meeting on homelessness today between the county commissioners and the city of Eugene. Did you have just kind of like a quick summation or a couple?
I got nothing for you on that. I was not in that meeting, but
well Brian just turned on his video,
hey,
so I think
Brian's there.
he's saving
look at that
your neck.
guy. Look at that guy.
You know, I threw in a couple of key points that, at least that I heard, that there was just a lot of really good information. I don't think that I could accurately be able to provide that summary here at this moment's notice. So I would just encourage folks to go check that link. It was about a 25 to 30 minute presentation, and then a really good question and answer session after that. And that was, again, both with the Eugene City Council as well as Lane County Board of Commission.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. And thank you, Thea, for the steadfast work that you're doing on behalf of the neighbors and the neighborhood, just to make sure that we not only raise concerns, but we build relationships with city staff like Kelly. Jen, I appreciate you being patient. So you're up next. And then Dan, you're in the queue after Jen. Jen?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here, Kelly. I don't know where to start, but how long have you been in this position that you're at for 4 months? Is that what you said?
Yeah, just about that.
Okay, so we have been dealing with this for at least 21 years. And there's always this encouraging, listening and all this, but there's nothing that's really resolved. And I know there's more to it, and I understand. We don't have a police force that has a full staff. We're constantly, thinned out, and it's a challenge. And I don't understand how there's a disconnect with the city and the county on it's been very, very long. Now we know that the services are understaffed. It seems to go hand in hand. We create a service, but we don't really staff them full enough to be successful. And that's a very big frustration. So we just keep going in this circle. And it's very discouraging to hear how you don't know this part and you'll get back to us, because we need everybody at the table at one time so we can get an answer. But the bottom line is we do not have the funds, and we got to figure out how to get those funds, and also how to keep it out of the hands of the wrong people, so that it goes directly to whatever plan we end up doing whenever that gets done. It's everything that was brought up earlier is on my mind, and it has to do with the mentally ill who have no resource to help themselves. It is the saddest thing, and yet we don't have the places and facilities to take them to if they want to. We have to respect if they don't want to, that they don't need to, they can't go. We can't make them go. All this we understand, but what is frustrating is that's a long time of understanding. And I hope that you put some teeth in this and take this back information that you're getting back to the city and get connected with the county and do something, because I'm just hearing the same story over and over again. And I get it, everybody's very polite, but nothing gets resolved. And if it wasn't for the good hearts of people who do volunteer work, who carry a lot of the burden to do these things, I don't know where we'd be, but it's a very exhausting. 21 years is a long time. So I don't mean to be harsh. It's just that I just can't take this nice talk anymore that really doesn't materialize into anything. And people have meetings and you're not able, you weren't at that meeting. And so, there's just this great big disconnect. So I'm sorry to be such sound so pessimistic, because that's not my nature. It's just, that's how I feel when I hear the answers that you've given.
Well, Jennifer, I definitely understand the frustration. I am not trying to talk nicely on this. I'm trying to talk honestly. And that's, and that's part of the tough nature of this. Is it's not a problem that has a clear solution. It's not something that any community anywhere in the country or the world has found a magical answer for. Now or 20 years ago or at any other time. And we're definitely working with the severity of the situation is unlike anything that it's been before. And it's simply something that our systems aren't built for. We're trying to come up with answers. I can't tell you to be satisfied with what we've come up with. And it's definitely frustrating. I can just tell you that your neighbors and your fellow citizens who are employed at the city understand your frustration, and we are trying to come up with anything that we can. I'm sorry that I didn't have all the answers to the questions. A thing that we could do in the future is maybe people could submit their questions in advance, and then we could see what those are, and we could pull the right people into the meeting to make sure that every question could get answered on the fly. But again, I would do everything that I can to try and follow up with that information and get it back to you. But yeah, I just want you to know that we get it. We know how tired the neighborhood is. We're trying to get things figured out, and we'll just keep listening and trying to come up with solutions for that. And we appreciate your involvement in trying to come up with those solutions and have them be ones that are hopefully effective, but also humane.
Thank you. One of the things that makes me nervous is I think that we all know that somehow eventually we're going to have to raise our taxes to address serious issues. And for me in particular, to help those who are mentally ill. And that includes those are people that are on drugs, strung out. And I can handle that, but I'm terrified that leaders, the city, the county will not utilize the funds correctly. And I don't know how many plans have been, put in, people have been asked to do over the decades, nothing ever, they're not connected. That's my main thing, is that somehow, I don't know why, even if we had the money, how are we going to connect and make this materialize and become something? And we all know that this has been a problem, and it's a problem of the world. But I live here in Whiteaker and Eugene, and this is where I have to put my energy into. So that's another issue, is the concern if eventually that we do get our taxes increased, that the money would be spent wisely and correctly and appropriately. I don't know if you're going to take this to whoever your peers are to address these issues or questions that we have, but it would be nice. Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks so much, Jen. Next up, we have Dan and then myself. Dan?
Hi, yeah. Thanks for all the information tonight, Kelly and everybody else. I don't have a whole lot to comment on now. It seems like everything's been touched on, but I wanted to say one quick thing, and it kind of has a big interface with what Jen was saying about lack of connect between the different agencies. And that is that, as Anon mentioned, 1/3 of the people that are unhoused are there because of mental health or substance abuse issues. And my concern, what I see daily on my 3 corners that I walk by every day, is the people moving out of the park or have never been to the park, um, who are able to just remain. What are the laws regarding people in medians? I myself, as a homeowner, have been told countless times that there are things I can do and cannot do. It's not my property. I have to maintain it. It's a contradiction in terms. I don't have anyone camping in my median currently, but plenty of my neighbors have. I mean, I even witnessed a car camper around the corner from myself who's been in a black Cadillac under a tarp. We've all seen him. He's been in the neighborhood for 6 months, receiving oral sex on the street in his car. There's a level of stress and, well, distress that I feel. And I don't want to sound heartless. Of course, I want these people to be taken care of, but that particular gentleman is there 100%. Well, I can't say that. He's there by choice. He's there, as EMTs explained to me before COVID, who would serve these people, that most of them that he would serve were there because of the lifestyle, which we can all surmise what that means. Nefarious activities, generally speaking, they're not there for a typical good time. And there's no, what do we do? Where do we go? Someone is there for a week or a month. We can call, they put up stakes last year saying that a camper has 5 days to leave. But for the person who lives next to that camper, that is never going to do. And you're never going to go talk to that person. I mean, very rarely. So I am just complaining. It could go on for days, but
Well, it's well understood. This is definitely something that we're seeing in many parts of the community. I've talked with many folks in the Whiteaker neighborhood, as well as other areas who have experienced similar things. That's really one of the things that we're trying to work on is strategizing. How can we address this more effectively? There are some things that can be done legally about camping in those planning strips, and there are things that the nearby property owners can do that will enable police to be able to trespass people from those locations. So that's a thing that we can follow up and get some information out on about that. And we are trying to work on what are the leverage points that we can use to go beyond what the things that we've been restricted by in terms of what the law allows, with how long people are required to be able to, to have camps posted before they can be moved or before vehicles can be towed and things like that. So it's just something that we're continuing to work on to see how can we do this better? How can we still be fair, still be legal and lawful in what we're doing, but also maybe be more effective with it, because we know that we are in many cases dealing with a population, as you say, that they're not looking for assistance with exiting their situation and trying to get into the first available program that could give them shelter and a more stable existence. They are trying to, evade accountability. And we're trying to work on that. And I understand that that's not a helpful answer at this point, but it's something that we're definitely still trying to work on.
yeah. One last point too, before we move along. I have to wonder all the time, because as Jen's noticed, and I've been in the same house for 25 years now, that it seems like our neighborhood bears the brunt of all of these problems. And if you were to move a homeless camp to Tugman Park or Amazon Park, what would be the blowback there? I mean, I realize that we are different neighborhoods spiritually and economically and experientially than every other neighborhood in town, but that doesn't mean that the bulk of society's problems regarding these people who have got a really rough row need to be in our laps all the time. And I wonder how it would be if they were dispersed through the community. Would the community become more accepting? Would the community become more intolerant? Would civic services respond in a much different way? And do they respond in a different way regarding which neighborhood the problem is in?
I can say as an answer to the last one that people, regardless of where the issue is, and you'll never get any argument from me that I think that Whitaker gets more than its share based on population and density and whatnot of this kind of activity. But the response from the city is they're going to the places where the problems are. They're doing everything that they can based on the number of people they have available and the laws that exist to deal with it. And they're going around and doing that wherever it is. And we're spending most of our time in the Whitaker neighborhood and in West Eugene. There are other issues that are happening where people are very unhappy about things that have been allowed to get a foothold and linger in other parts of the community that would be traditionally looked at as being higher in their property values and that sort of thing, and they're having frustrations as well. I'm not seeing anything where there is some sort of a magical and rapid response happening in certain neighborhoods, but not in others. I think that my colleagues are maxed out on what they're trying to provide, and we are spending most of our time in Whitaker and in West Eugene with that. Your other points, very well understood. It's a message that I pass on frequently. It's something that we're always hopeful that city council will have kind of robust conversations about that, about how this kind of issue is borne by the entire community. And so that as council is giving direction to city staff when we look to develop these safe sleep sites and things like that, that we are representing everybody in our community.
Thanks so much for that, Dan. I really appreciate you being so patient, but also what you're bringing to the conversation. We have a couple of quick follow-ups, and I'm saying quick because Jen and Thea have already had a chance to speak before, and then we're going to be moving on to our next speaker this evening after I have a quick question, 2 questions for Kelly as well. So Jen, you're up right now, and then Thea, you're on deck.
Okay, I just wanted to say, Kelly MacIver, thank you for coming. And I hope you don't disconnect from us and that you come back with some good answers and a crew that can come back with some good answers as well. So please come back. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, now that Jen's butter him up, quick, go for the gut punch, Thea. And now he's weak, his defenses are down.
Just for Kelly and Brian. Okay, we've got a lot of property owners here. Dan just said, how do I deal with someone? If I'm not mistaken, you guys can help me here. Property owners need to have a no trespass filed with EPD so that when they report an issue, then EPD can roll on it. Is that correct? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I believe that's correct, Brian. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, no, that's specifically for if you're talking about the planter strip for people who are camping in the planter strip. Yeah, that is true, Thea.
Now, on the planter strips, what are we allowed to do? Because the city and EPD keeps telling people, well, you need to make them not so camper friendly. So we've seen vegetation put in, we've seen rocks put in. If you go by Cider Works, they've totally re-landscaped that whole area over there by Venue 252 and Cider Works. What is a property owner allowed to do? Because I know Bari was going to take care of some things out there and they said, oh no, you can't do that. It's going to block the access to the bicycles and it's going to block street view for cars to get across the street. And now we've got someone camping there with so much stuff piled up. You can't get by in a wheelchair. You can't get by in a car. You can't get by in a bicycle. So as a property owner, can you guys get us a list? So if there's something on there we can afford as our own, because we want it to look nice as well. We don't want to have a bunch of boulders everywhere.
Yeah, there definitely are. There are things that you can, like there are height restrictions, mostly for so people can be able to see as they're trying to navigate the city, whether it's driving, walk, mostly driving. Let's be honest there. But yeah, we can work on a
Tell
list of
Brad.
what yeah, but if it's things like, especially for blocking, the sidewalks, roads, those are all part of our transportation network, the access ramps. So if those are being blocked as well, we definitely need to know about that because we need to get those open and get those clear so people can move and utilize those things. And as for a list, we can come up with something and just kind of give you the specifications of what it is and some options as far as what can be put in those planter strips.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Thea. I mean, I know that, for years, EPD has had folks on their staff that are involved with crime prevention that can work with businesses about, how do you do your landscaping and things to try to make things as secure and safe as possible for people and to cut down on the opportunities for for crime using lighting and different things like that. So I would hope that we could apply some of those same concepts about strategies and tactics and things to the planning strip idea. I think it's a great idea and it's something we can work on.
Yeah, and as Dan brings up, there are some people that would like to have that piece of grass there and not have to put vegetation. So do we just continue to nag EPD and nag Public Works that someone has left unsanitary conditions? Because I know you have to call hazmat out on some of it.
Yes, nagging is part of the whole plan. Please keep doing it.
I'm good at it. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. So my nag is Adams Street needs cleaned up really bad, and so does Third and Blair and Van Buren. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Thea. And thanks so much to everyone for being a part of the conversation. That's an ongoing one. And that, like Jen mentioned, is 21 plus years old in our community. Part of what I wanted to share tonight is framing two questions for Kelly and for Brian with a comment. First, I'd like to say, thanks to Kelly, thanks to Brian for coming tonight. I know that it's sometimes not easy. Although we're a nonprofit organization and a neighborhood association, I think the city sometimes fixates on some of the most unsavory parts of the reputations of neighborhood associations, and sometimes the approach that neighborhood association leaders and that neighbors who associate with neighborhood associations have to responding to this issue. It's almost as if we don't see you as people and we see you as part of an operations team and an organization that has failed our community. And frankly, I think that's unfortunate because I really feel that by working together and by having human relationships, we can be able to accomplish a lot for the people who need the most help and who want the most help. Not folks like Dan was mentioning, but people who want to be able to transition off the streets, get life-saving surgery, and be able to transition into stable housing for whatever reasons or mix of reasons made them live on the street in the first place. And I wanted to touch on something that you, Kelly, talked about as a former resident, and as Dan talked about too. You can look at the data from the 2010 census, and we'll look too at the data coming out from the 2020 census, as broken as that process was because of a former president that I won't mention. But truly, these data show that we are the poorest community in Eugene by a wide margin, with more than a third of our residents living at or below the federal poverty line, whether they're in households or individually. It's atrocious. However, we are not getting the resources that we need to be able to not just survive, but live, to thrive. And I think that people talk a lot about the bulk of the problems existing here, which is an important conversation. But I think what they don't talk about is how some of the best solutions come out of here, because we are faced with the reality that if failure is not an option, success becomes inevitable, right? So we don't have the option to fail, right? We just can't do that. And so when the pandemic hit, we came together, a bunch of volunteers, like Jen said, and devised a plan to be able to keep our community safe, because we knew the poorest people in our country, the poorest people in Oregon, the poorest people in Eugene were disproportionately likely to die from COVID. And we can't tell you tonight which of us have had folks in our families and our neighborhood die from COVID, but there are certainly more than one of us. And it is deeply tragic. And unfortunately, the city wasn't there with us, but the federal government was, through the Oregon Health Authority, and Lane County was. And we've received hundreds of thousands of dollars, which we've brought back to the community, tens and thousands of dollars to local businesses. We've, like I said, stood up wellness clinics to give critical care to our most vulnerable neighbors, vaccinating hundreds of people, but that wasn't in partnership with the city of Eugene. What a tragedy. What a missed opportunity. Thank God for Oregon Health Authority. Thank God for Lane County Public Health, because they knew that we, those of us who have been the most impoverished, had the capacity to come together and serve ourselves. Unfortunately, City of Eugene wasn't there for us, but I hope y'all can be there for us right now. Because I'm proud to tell you today, because of the work that we've done since the pandemic hit, we have been selected as the only nonprofit in the entirety of the state of Oregon that's getting $75,000 to give to local artists so that we can increase vaccine confidence in our community. The only nonprofit in the state of Oregon, from the CDC Foundation, no less. And so I'm saying this, Brian, I'm saying this, Kelly, I'm saying this, Eric, not because y'all should look at us as the people that should be pitied the most, the people that need to give extra help. Rather, I'm saying this because we know how to support ourselves. And I'm not even saying get out of our way. I'm saying let's do this together. You know, we have consistently, since the 1930s, the 1940s, been the community that you put your freeway in. This is a long, long history of being subjugated, of being taken advantage of. But because of this, we've learned how to work together to be able to take ourselves out of the situation that we've been forced into. And we're going to continue to do that with or without your support, but I hope it's with your support. And I hope that the one thing you can take back is not a question or a comment, but really a sentiment that we're going to continue to be with each other and continue to work with you individually and collectively through this organization, which will outlive us all, for better or for worse. So that's my speech. But what I really wanted to press you a little bit on was the Homeless Resource Center. Before I talk about how 13th and Chambers and WJ are really different from each other, because that's something that I struggle with, kind of the differentiation between the two. And that's something I wanted y'all to sunshine a little bit. But I did want to press on Delinia's point a little bit, because she was talking about something pretty unique and novel. And it's like a mobile homeless resource center. And so some of us are lucky enough to be a part of the Homeless Resource Center Steering Committee, which unfortunately has sputtered and stalled. And so I'm representing the Whiteaker Community Council, I think, and I'm pretty sure Thea and Margaret are representing individual neighbors. And again,
it's a joke.
Okay, so I want to say the Homeless Resource Center was policy direction laid out by council saying that, hey, we need to create a space for unhoused adults to provide connections to services like assistance to housing, work readiness, job development, mentoring, benefits assistance, hygiene services, running the gamut. And during the pandemic was a time that we needed this resource center the most. And I understand that there's this tension, an ongoing one between, do we put additional resources in the place where the people need it the most, or do we locate resources in communities that are not as severely impacted by the housing crisis and by the unhoused crisis? But Kelly, I wanted to ask you kind of about this tension. I know that you talked about how the county traditionally has been the one with both the funding streams to the federal government, as well as kind of the policy and operations jurisdiction over responding to our unhoused crisis. But really some of the policy direction which created the pilot and funding for the Homeless Resource Center came from the city of Eugene. And it's a policy vision that's never been executed. And it's a vision, honestly, from the staff folks who are on the Homeless Resource Center operations side will admit there were failures, and that there's still a great deal of struggle to create any sort of use and operations of the space. Currently, it's being occupied by a couple of different folks. Whitebird is working out of there, as well as Core. Some of their operations are too. So I just wanted to say that, like, the question that Delinia asked, I felt was answered, but also kind of deferred and kind of deflected a little bit to, like, oh, the county is the one who's in charge of operations of resource centers. This mobile idea is an interesting one, but no thanks. But I really feel that some of the policy direction from the city it created the funding and the model for the operations of the Homeless Resource Center on 5th, next to and across from Washington Jefferson Park, but that was never actualized. And there's again been a ton of missed opportunities to activate that space. So Kelly, I'm wondering kind of how does the Homeless Resource Center fit within that operations purview of the incident command, and what sort of momentum or movement do we have currently on the Homeless Resource Center to activate it once Whitebird is slated to leave their leasing of the space in 2022? And then I have one follow-up question just about the difference between WJ and 13th and Chambers.
So Ian, at the risk of adding another arrow to Jen's quiver on this, and I will let Brian, if he's got a better answer than I do, I encourage my worthy colleague to step in. But what I'd like to do is to add that to the list of really good questions that have been brought up, and recruit the appropriate people to come back with really thorough answers, because I'm not intending to be dodging anything. It's that you're catching me off guard without thorough background on what what we were going to be talking about in that regard. And I'd hate to not bring you the info you need. So we've got people who could talk very thoroughly and authoritatively about that. So let's work on that and get you the info you need on it.
Thanks. And we've been having these conversations. I actually resigned from the Homeless Resource Center Committee in front of Margaret, and I think the not because of Peter or Reagan or Jason and the work that they did, but because of the lack of prioritization of that. So I think the people that are going to ask are Reagan, Peter, and Jason, and then they're going to send an email to me. So what I'm hoping isn't so much the connection between you facilitating me having that conversation with Peter, Reagan, and Jason, but rather kind of reiterating to y'all. And I know that silos are sometimes built unintentionally, and I really see the new kind of incident command as a way to break down those silos and have a more streamlined and targeted approach to solving this. But I can tell you that they themselves would shrug their shoulders, right? If it came to, hey, why isn't this operational? And those are the 3 staff members that are in charge of this thing. So, I mean, I've mapped out entirely with if-then statements, with this is when this happened, this is when that happened. So I can just say kind of carte blanche, Kelly, if Jason or Reagan or Peter were here, they would add more context, and they would speak more authoritatively and intelligently on why it sputtered and stalled. But I would say pretty definitively, it's not from a lack of understanding, why we're not here, why we're not in the place that we are, but rather, like, I do want to state kind of unequivocally, there was policy direction from council to create this Homeless Resource Center. Nothing has happened. Absolutely nothing. Like it's currently being leased. Basically, the city of Eugene is subleasing a building, and I feel to the extent that we can, it would be really important to be able to have greater alignment between the incident command and the operation of this Homeless Resource Center, because we, the Homeless Resource Center Steering Committee, have put a lot of time and energy into creating a model for how to be able to operationalize that policy, and our voices have had diminishing returns since this group was brought together. And I know that Margaret has a comment as well.
No, I just wanted to know if you remember off the top of your head, what year did they actually decide to allocate the funds for the Homeless Resource Center? It was 5-6 years ago.
I can't recall, but I know the Homeless Resource Center Steering Committee was convened for the first time in 2020.
Right. I think the money was allocated though 5 or 6 years ago, so it was way before COVID.
Right. Thea, you might have a comment as well.
I'm not sure about the length of time. I just know that they're not responding to our questions anymore. So, but that's a whole nother issue than what we're doing right now.
Right.
Even when we reach out to them, I've asked specific questions in regards to WJ and outreach and resource, and none of them are answering. So we need better connection, guys.
Yeah, and so again, this is not to diminish or bash the good work of Reagan and Jason and Peter, but that's just to say that a real missed opportunity for both the positive type of civic engagement that I know that the city's committed to, as well as the type of operational excellence that I think that the Incident Command can contribute to, it is not being met for the Homeless Resource Center. And it's a pretty, and hey, the space is being activated. It's currently being used by CORE in org, doing tremendous outreach to 16 to 24-year-old unhoused youth, as well as Whitebird that's doing critical medical appointments for folks, but it's not being used for a homeless resource center. And there's a lot of context and reasoning behind why it's not being used. But I think we can all agree, and Delinia's point too, that there was policy direction from the city council, not from the county, as well as funding allocated to this project from the city of Eugene, not Lane County, to this project. And it'd be great to have some clarity around how we can better work together to contribute to that success, or at least have a deeper understanding why it's time to call the project. Because being in this purgatory for so long feels like it attributes to the narrative that it is unproductive to work with the city. At least it's what it feels like for me. When I think that I've tried to iterate that us as an organization and us as individuals are pretty strongly committed to successful partnerships, ones that where you can meaningfully engage and have progress towards stuff. So I just wanted to leave y'all with that one. And my next question is about the difference between 13th and Chambers and WJ, because I've been to both, been lucky enough to meet some of our unhoused neighbors at both of those locations in the summertime. And it's frankly, it was a pretty rough experience meeting folks, seeing what they went through in both of those locations during the peak of the summer, particularly at 13th and Chambers when there wasn't any covering. So I've been really enjoying the notes that y'all have been sending to emails, showcasing the number of folks that are occupied at your grid spaces. The first email that I got from y'all was the 21st of October. So I created some just like little graphics to help me understand how many grid spaces have been occupied, but also kind of like have some corollaries that might be able to help me understand what's attributing to people occupying grid spaces and what's helping me understand people leaving. So I have a couple of columns here, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. So I'm going to try to zoom in really quick before you can see nothing. But basically, I have some data in the columns. In column B, it's some information that y'all gave to me in these emails. And then these graphs at the bottom are basically visualizations of these data. So the first one we have here is grid spaces occupied by precipitation, rainfall, grid spaces occupied by average temperature, and then rainfall by average temperature. So I'm basically trying to see, like, over time, how folks at 13th and Chambers and Washington Jefferson Park are leaving, and if there's any correlations between like rainfall and temperature and people staying or people leaving. And so there's a ton of data. Brian's already smiling. There's a ton of data that I'm already missing. But the reason that I'm putting this up here is because these are two fundamentally different places, right? Like, I would assume that 13th and Chambers, people would leave like crazy because it's not covered, right? And it's cold and it's wet. But like, if you look at the numbers of WJ, like WJ, folks have been leaving en masse. Like in October 21st, 227 grid spaces occupied, and then November 24th, 136. It seems as if Washington Jefferson Park has either a different population, or there's a different type of enforcement, or the way in which the inclement weather is impacting folks there is changing the way that people want to camp. And when I was at 13th and Chambers, it was just, the way in which things were set up, it was really different than Washington Jefferson. So I'm super surprised that folks from WJ are leaving in the numbers that they are, as much as they are, versus Chambers. So I'm wondering, kind of generally, if you can speak, either Kelly or Brian, to my, not so pretty, but wanting to be pretty graphs about, it seems to me like these are two very different places with perhaps two very different populations, or maybe my hypothesis is totally wrong. Maybe they are very similar places with very similar populations, and what we're seeing is completely unrelated to temperature and completely unrelated to rainfall. But yeah, I was wondering, kind of generally, if you could talk about what Washington Jefferson Park is and what 13th and Chamber is, talk about the similarities and the differences between the two, and then also, why are we seeing such a drop in residents at Washington Jefferson relative to 13th and Chambers?
So this really comes back to the ability of the staffs at those sites and having enforcement support from the park resource officers to be able to manage the compliance with the temporary camp criteria. So for a long time, there were not the resources there to be able to really work with that population. So site staff at WJ had been working with people the best that they could to try and get compliance, but there was always a way larger number of people at WJ than at 13th. And so there was a commensurate percentage of folks there that were not in compliance. And that went for a long period of time without being thoroughly addressed. The WJ was gridded after 13th. Brian, is that correct? Am I right on that?
Yeah, significantly after.
So the gridding, which again, it's very much a smaller space at 13th to begin with, and then 13th had been previously gridded, which again makes that entire process much easier for staff to be able to manage and work with the campers there. WJ was gridded later, and it was a much larger space in terms of the total number of people. So the process of going around, noting folks that were out of compliance, trying to go through the process of encouraging compliance, and then when things needed to be posted that camp spaces were out of compliance and they had an amount of time to be able to get into compliance, that then had to be supported by park resource officers, which weren't always available. So we really went for an extended period of time where that wasn't being enforced in the same way that it had been previously at 13th. And we saw the precipitous drops when we were able to get that enforcement support to uphold the temporary camp criteria that were in place at both locations, but hadn't been enforced as consistently at WJ. So I don't think that there's any connections with any of this with climate, temperatures, precipitation, any of that. People generally, what we're down to at both locations is the remaining folks are the ones who have demonstrated that they are able and willing to work with park site staff and to be in compliance with the temporary camp criteria. And they, in many cases, would prefer to be where they are than to be in unsanctioned situations on the street. Some of those folks that have left, it's not because they are fleeing to go to from someplace that's covered to another place. It's because they're being asked to leave because they're not complying with those criteria and they're creating health and safety problems for that larger camp.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Kelly. And I think it was a core administered survey in partnership with the city of Eugene around the percentage of campers at both 13th and Chambers and Washington Jefferson Park that would be willing to move into some sort of city administered camping. And of course, there's like massive selection bias, right? And it's not a statistically significant sample. And so throwing out everything we all learned in Statistics 101, is there like is it encouraging news, like anecdotally? Because I think what I heard from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the folks who are staying at Washington Jefferson and at 13th and Chambers are the people who want to stay, are the people who want to be able to be in compliance.
Sorry, Ian, your audio cut off there.
Oh, no worries. My computer cuts me off when I get long-winded, so it's actually something
He'll
very,
be
very
back in a
positive.
minute.
That muting always happens at the worst time.
Can you hear me now?
There he is.
Great. I was just saying my computer cuts me off when I get long-winded, so it's actually something good for everyone. I was just going to say that, like, it seems to me like the folks who are both at WJ and at 13th and Chambers are the people who want to stay, who want to be in compliance. So are at least anecdotally for the parks ambassadors, have y'all heard about the people that are staying if they want to be able to move to a safe sleep site? Or is it too early to know what percentage of the folks who are currently still camping at WJ and at 13th and Chambers want to be able to transition on to a safe sleep site or the Eugene Mission or a microsite?
So as I had alluded before, I think that is true. I think that that the folks that are there at both of those sites have demonstrated, at the very least, an ability to work with pretty basic criteria. Staff at the sites have begun to work with the campers to get questions answered about what life in the safe sleep sites might be like, so that their concerns or questions that they have about that can be answered by St. Vincent de Paul, and really start to prepare folks for a possible transition. So obviously we're hoping that as many of those people as possible are going to be interested and enthusiastic about moving to a safe sleep site. And so that's why we want to make it as easy as possible, both in terms of getting their questions answered, making sure that they feel comfortable, that they see this as a good, positive step that is going to be safer for them, better for them, and a good opportunity that they should take advantage of. And then the city is going to be really doing a ton of work to do everything we can to facilitate that move. So again, making sure that that they're taken care of and that they wind up at the safe sleep site with everything that they need to be successful there.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And Margaret, you're going to have the last word on this tonight before we transition onto our speaker, Eric. Thank you again, Eric, for being so.
Okay, and I'll try to keep this short and sweet, and just so I make sure that I understand what we're saying here and to bring it into layman's terms. Basically, what you're saying is that for a long period of time, the park was just left kind of like the wild, wild west, and people could do whatever they wanted to do because there was no one monitoring them. And a lot of things happened. And then the city came in to the park, the very last place in town, started enforcing rules. And the people that have left and that are now living on our streets, on our corners, in front of our restaurants, in our parking lots, those are the people that did not want to follow the rules and are probably the ones that need the most help in some ways, but also are the most dangerous. Is that what you're telling us?
And the most willing. That was part of my initial preamble.
Right. I heard
you
say that. I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't sure why that was until you said that Washington Jefferson, that you guys just left it alone. For lack of a better phrase, and I mean, I grew up on the streets as a kid, but when it first started, the police and the city used Washington Jefferson Park like a dumping ground with homeless people. They just brought people that were on the streets and put them in the park and said, you can just stay here. And they did. And it got so there were a lot of people. It was crazy. There were a lot of wild things going on in there. So basically what you just told us, and I understand you're just doing your job, so don't misunderstand me, was it was the last park that you guys went into and brought some structure to, but it was also one of the first that was created as far as being for camping. Is that correct? So I make sure I understand.
Brian, I'm going to have to ask for your help because of the creation of it predates my time by quite a bit. Margaret, I'll answer the kind of the last part of it, that there's, at least in the time that I've been here, in the time that that Washington Jefferson, I mean, it's been a temporary camp situation. There's been city staff who are at the site, who provide site monitoring. There's been services there to try to deal with, the health and hygiene issues and things like that, waste removal and those sorts of things. And there have been park resource officers there. So there has been monitoring, there's been working with the people there. It's just that the kind of observing the compliance or lack thereof with the camping criteria over time, there were probably, a good month or more where some of the things that could have been addressed more quickly or on a regular basis weren't addressed. And so that number remained high while there were a large number of people who were out of compliance persistently with the camp criteria. So
right.
Brian can speak more to
2 years, almost at this point, not months.
And that's what I'll defer to Brian about the longer history there.
Yeah, Morgan, so for me, kind of the bigger part of when people really started moving into WJ was probably around late December. So it's been about a year. And this isn't anything that we've ever done before, being the city, as far as having to try and run a camp. So we were not experts. I hope we're still not experts. We don't want to be. But that being said, there was definitely a learning curve for us as well. So we started standing up some resources, and could have been more in the beginning? Probably, but we had always started to have some type of resources, and then we would adjust. We'd learn, and then we'd adjust. And I think part of what we've seen is this fluctuation as well is then when people would continue to move around inside of Washington, Jefferson as well. And then it was hard for us to understand who was where and what and all of that as well. And so, we've continued to evolve and adjust our processes.
And I don't mean to interrupt you. And I understand that. I can see the park. I stand outside of the corner of my house and I see the park straight down the alley. But what my question is it was one of the first unsanctioned or sanctioned campgrounds, and then it was one of the last that you guys went in and put some structure to. Is that correct?
I would say that it was
the people that are now living on our streets, which there's definitely more. It's increased over the last 4 months. There's no doubt.
I would argue that it was both the first unsanctioned camp that the city was running, both for the amount of people who were there and then the amount of resources. That was also the first place that we put resources into. As the pandemic was really unfolding, we were dropping restrooms in, and you saw that we had the sanitation stations that we would put throughout the city. So we were putting dumpsters and collecting trash from people. So our response throughout this entire pandemic has kind of changed and morphed as this pandemic has also done, and as more people started moving into WJ. And that was, in my recollection,
that's not my question. My question was, so what you're telling me is it was one of the last to be structured, and the people that are and one of the first built, and the people that are leaving, because the numbers are dramatically dropping, and you can tell by driving by, but also our streets are filling up again. So those are the people that do not want to live in a structured situation and would rather live in the wild, wild west and do what they want.
I agree with you on that last part. I would say
it was a question. So pretty much that's what you guys are telling us. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I started with, and I think that.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah,
and like I said,
those folks showed that they were unable or unwilling to meet the temporary camp criteria, and they are presumed to be camping elsewhere in the community. That's I think pretty undeniable.
And I have to thank you both for the job that you're doing. And, you're doing something that is a huge undertaking. So please don't misunderstand me. I just wanted to clarify what I thought that I heard. And I think that that's what's happening as well. But thank you for coming very much. And thank you also for your transparency. I appreciate that, because we don't always get that. So Ian, it's back to you.
Well, yeah, I just want to echo Margaret's comments. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Kelly, for spending your evening. Brian, I don't want to undershine your participation, but I do know from a very reliable source that it's Kelly's wife's birthday tonight. And so I just want to say that not only was he transparent, not only has he spent hours building a relationship with Thea, but he's also taking personal time out of his time with his partner to be able to spend it with us. So I just want to say thank you again, Kelly, for taking time that you could have been spending with a partner and really prioritizing our needs and listening to us. I know that there's, in a lot of cases, no clear answers, but I appreciate you listening and remarking and writing down our questions and committing to continuing to work with us, because the folks that are here in this virtual room are here because we want to be able to work with the city and we want to be able to build relationships. So thanks again for taking time out of your night and really listening and spending it with us. And we're certainly not done. And I wanted to thank Eric. Eric, you have been patiently waiting. You certainly, if you saw the agenda, you would know that it's going to be a pretty dense conversation around ways to be able to work with our unhoused neighbors and with the city of Eugene on Washington Jefferson Park. But it's been a really interesting conversation evolving on social media about a specific tree. And not only is this specific tree one that a lot of people have deep memories and connections to, But this conversation, as it's been evolving, the community council reaching out to the city, individual neighbors reaching out to the community council, individual neighbors reaching out to our city council member who can't be here tonight, but I just wanted to shout out to Councilmember Syret. Councilmember Syret heard the huge amount of responses from community members and from the council and reached out to city staff, including Eric DeBoard, the urban forestry supervisor with Parks and Open Spaces for the city of Eugene, to talk about not only preservation of this specific tree and what options we have if the tree is not too diseased when it needs to be removed, but also how can we work together in a more productive way to be able to increase tree canopy in the Whiteaker and also be able to find opportunities for greater communication and collaboration. So I know it's going to be informal, no fancy charts or spreadsheets tonight from Eric, but Eric, I just wanted to say thanks. I can only imagine how surprised you must have been when you were just doing your job and you were really worried about someone being hit or ADA access not being available for folks on the sidewalks. And then all of a sudden your phones were getting lit up, your email inbox was getting full, and you're like, wow, people really must love this big leaf maple. But I just wanted to say thanks for coming tonight. And I'm hoping, much like our conversation with Brian and Kelly, the conversation we have tonight about urban forest canopy, how do we preserve and increase the number of trees, can be one that we continue to have, because we would love to find ways to work more closely together with you and your team to be able to increase the amount of trees in the neighborhood and the forest canopy. So I'm wondering, at like a super high level, can you tell us what your job is, why trees are important? They're beautiful, but like specifically why like urban forest canopy is something that's important. And then what's up with that big leaf maple? Like, what was it about this tree that people love so much?
Good question. So I definitely appreciate all the robust conversation. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Yeah, I certainly appreciate all the robust conversation. And, being an urban forester, certainly no stranger to controversy. Actually, I work with the public all the time because people, I actually enjoy it when people have questions about trees. It's actually pretty frustrating for me to, go out and be doing tree work and people just tend to not care or be indifferent to it. And that's actually much more problematic in my mind, because I feel like people should be paying more attention sometimes. But yeah, a little bit about me. My name's Eric DeBoard. I've been at the city for about 10 years now. I'm now the supervisor. I was a climber and boom truck operator for the first 7 years that I was here, and I've done some pretty extensive preservation work on a lot of the big leaf maples, more so in JWN than the Whiteaker. But yeah, we do a lot of preservation work on our big leaf maples, and there's something that we feel are very important. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But yeah, basically my entire work career has centered around trees. So I'm very familiar with them. I'm a tree lover myself. I understand the attachment to trees. I'm a rare plant collector, old growth climber. I am immersed in trees. It's really all I've ever done as an adult for work and mostly for play. So this position I feel like is a really good one, because I do get to interface with folks and help manage the forest here in town. So a specific update on this tree, folks are well aware, it's located at the corner of 3rd and Adams. And it's one of a number of big leaf maples in the Whiteaker neighborhood. This particular one, of all the ones that we looked at, this particular one kind of ranked the lowest in terms of structural stability and health. How we got to that is basically we inventory all the trees before we do any work on them. I'm going to back up just even a little bit more. So, because I want to talk to something that was mentioned earlier, and it was kind of where services get distributed around town. For many years, we only did responsive work, meaning when people called, we would respond. And people, some neighborhoods call more than others. And the Whiteaker neighborhood, typically, we did not get a lot of requests for service. Either folks maybe just weren't sure that those services were offered, or maybe they didn't want city staff, working on trees. But people have all sorts of different reasons, and that's perfectly fine and good. But we realized that we needed to do better. We needed to spread these services out more equitably. So that was a switch that we made about 5 years ago. A lot of folks have probably never seen us prune in the Whiteaker very much, or work in the Whiteaker very much. And now you're seeing this big project is going on where we're pruning a bunch of trees, we're removing some trees. So what we're doing is basically just being proactive. And we've gone through the entire Whiteaker neighborhood. We've re-inventoried all the trees. They've been inventoried for many years, but we updated our inventory, and then we prescribed the work that needed to happen. And so that's kind of where we're at now. And you've probably seen the crews that are running through town running through the neighborhood doing this tree work. That's actually a contract crew that we hire, and we're very familiar with their work. They really are an outstanding crew. So you'll notice that the cuts they're making, the choices that they're making are actually very good. They're all up to ANSI standards, ISA standards. So we don't just let anybody touch these trees. And we also realize that basically Whiteaker and JWN have our nicest, biggest trees that are left in town. And so we are not just going to let any hack go work on these trees. Right? We have really high standards for who we'll allow to actually work on these trees. And how we got to this particular tree, it was flagged by one of our inventory folks. Hey, this one has some issues, needs a little bit of further investigation. I actually worked with the technician. We had a fairly robust conversation before we even put the yellow posting up on whether or not this was the time to remove it. So there was, and you know, still is some question about that. We know that we're getting close. What we want is to keep that tree there as long as we can. What we don't want is for it to fall apart. Potentially, you know, it's unlikely that it would probably fail into the street right when somebody's underneath it. The problem is when that happens, though, we see a lot of unnecessary, a lot of trees that don't need to be removed, unnecessarily removed out of fear, right? So that's one of the things that we're trying to head off here. But the tree has, you know, some issues. It's, my guess is probably somewhere in the range of 100 to 120 years old. It's a really nice old big leaf maple. We're lucky to have those here. We also have those in an area that were planted before that area was heavily compacted, like they do with modern construction activities. So the soil there is really good alluvial soil that has not been overly compacted, right? So this really, JWN and Whiteaker both could be powerhouses for trees to provide these ecological services. They've got the best soil and the biggest planter strips. So the old neighborhoods, right? And so we don't want to lose the character. But you know, at times we do wind up we come across these trees that are questionable, and we want to catch them before they fail. And so that's how we got to posting this particular tree. So the issues with the tree, if it's okay, I'll just share my screen really quickly. I do have a couple photos.
You should be able to do it now, Eric. Thanks so much.
Oh, you bet. Okay, so share. Did everybody see that okay? And I'm going to full screen this just to make sure that you can. I'm working with a new ultra wide monitor, so I'm not sure how it's going to look for everybody else. But so here we are. Can you see? I'm going to bring up some photos here. Really quickly. Can everybody see this photo?
Yes. Okay,
so the issue with this tree, and this is really frustrating, the trees here predate the power lines, and this happens sometimes. So when they do this, they essentially go through, they remove, you know, the vast majority of the canopy, and then that leaves all of this stuff that's left, these branches, really exposed to sun. You know, there's really bad sun scald on these branches, which begins essentially incipient decay that gets into these branches, and a lot of it is centered right around here at the fulcrum point of the kind of the lever arm that's created by these long branches. And we do know that there's some significant decay in these areas. There's probably some in the trunk too, but I don't really worry about that. I'm not worried about this whole tree falling over. I'm really mostly worried about these branches coming down. They'll gain some velocity. I hate to say it, if these branches go, they're going to lay on the house. They'll probably do some damage to the gutter. They're not going to do anything really serious unless somebody was walking underneath it at that time, and it's very unlikely. But so we have, you know, I would say a mild safety concern here, but also just realizing that the tree is kind of getting towards the end of its life. So at some point we'll need to, you know, discuss a little bit further. And I'm going to try to stop sharing the screen really quickly here. I'm more of a Microsoft Teams person, so you'll have to just bear with me, please. Okay, here we go. So are you still seeing my screen, or are you able to see me at this point?
I'm still seeing your screen, but I'll see if I can change it so.
Does it say stop share? Do you see that?
Oh, here we go. I'm back to my
Yeah, I
Oh.
overrode you. So thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for sharing that. And yeah, really appreciate the context. I'm wondering if you can kind of just share really quickly how important urban forest canopy is. I think that I'm saying it correctly, but yeah, in our conversation,
Bingo.
I was like, whoa, I didn't realize how important that was. And you talked about ecosystem services of trees. And yeah, also
Bingo.
just like how much we have versus like other cities. It seems like we would have more, right? We're in the Pacific Northwest, but from our conversation over the phone, it seems like we really don't.
You would think. So the last thing I want to say on the specific tree that we were talking about, just where we're at, we're going to do a little bit further investigation. We actually have a tool that can actually measure the amount of decay in those branches. So we'll go there with our resistograph. We'll either do it this Friday or the following Monday, and we'll have some more information then. That'll help us make a determination. Can we? But really, what it comes down to, can we prune enough weight off of this thing to make sure that it's somewhat reinvigorated, but also safer? And that's really what it comes down to. And so there's some work left to be done there. But the bigger thing that I want to talk about is the canopy cover issue. So when we talk about urban canopy cover, it's how much of the city, when you're looking down from above, say an aerial photograph, in the summer, how much of that surface area is covered by leaf? And we've set standards for that. So the national average, what they consider an average canopy cover for a healthy community, is about 40%. So we have been able to track this fairly closely. So I would be just interested to see, does anybody have a guess, if they maybe want to put it in the chat, what the percentage of canopy cover for Eugene would be?
20%.
30%, 20%. So you're actually, it's actually about 22%, which is not good. I don't want to follow up an already, not great conversation with more bad news, right? We realize that we're in a time of kind of crisis right now, right? We've got a lot of big emergencies that are happening all at once, and the canopy cover issue in Eugene right now is a big one because it does play into, human health. There are all the ecosystem services, all the stormwater benefits. That's something that a lot of folks don't see with trees. When we get heavy rains, even if they're not in leaf, actually just their physical structure will actually slowly release water into the storm systems, right? So that the friction of that bark will actually keep water on that trunk, believe it or not, and then slowly release it into the storm system. We also have some requirements on water that gets just discharged into the Willamette River, and our urban forest right now gives us about $5 million in stormwater benefits between not having to treat water before it goes into the Willamette River, and then some of the other benefits that we get. So we're looking at, for a program that has about a $2 million budget, we get about $5 million a year in benefits. And there's very few other types of infrastructure that'll do that. And that sounds like a really cold thing to talk about with trees, but that sometimes when we are working with policymakers, we have to phrase it in that way to get them to understand, because a lot of things, we tend to monetize things. And that's one way that we can show the importance of trees is by monetizing it, right? So we know that we have almost it's like a 2.5 to 1 return on an investment. And that's really good for infrastructure. That's really good for anything that we invest in. Most things like concrete or buildings, that they tend to depreciate over time. Green infrastructure will actually increase over time. So that's why it's important to us. But yeah, Eugene right now at this point is about 22%. And we need to change that. When we look at other cities, comparables, Atlanta has the highest canopy cover that I know of, and that's approaching 60%. But when we look at it, it's hard to imagine New York City actually has a higher canopy cover than Eugene. Detroit, Michigan actually has a higher canopy cover than Eugene. Cincinnati, Ohio, higher canopy cover than Eugene. And a lot of folks really struggle to understand that. It's mind blowing, and we're actually trending the wrong direction. So that canopy cover is actually going down. So when we look at what is the canopy cover for the Whiteaker neighborhood right now, it's actually about 26%. So it's slightly higher than the city's average, which is good, but it's also declining. It's declined about 2% in the last 9 years. So it's trending the wrong direction. Long story short, the best way, and this is going to sound funny, right? Because I showed up here because we're talking about removing a tree. The best thing we can do is preserve trees. That's absolutely the best thing we do. And that really is the focus of our program, right? We did find a tree here that we feel would be appropriate for removal. But once again, preservation really is our focus. And that there's lots of things that lead to tree removal. And some of these things are things we really can't control. There's storms. We had the heat dome effect. This summer, we've definitely lost a lot of trees to drought. But then there's other things that we can control. We lose a lot of trees to development. And if we're a little bit smarter about how we develop, we can preserve a lot of trees. There's also things, the city of Eugene used to remove trees all the time for sidewalk repairs, and that's something that has gone away years ago. But if a tree came up for a sidewalk repair, it was actually the sidewalk was looked at as a more valuable asset than the tree, which is kind of mind blowing. But we don't do that anymore. We've moved away from that, which is good. Right now, we save every tree that we can when it comes to sidewalk repairs. Right, we only remove the ones that absolutely there's just no other reasonable alternatives. So we are at a time where we really need to be, as a community investing in our urban forest. There have been some good things that have come out of the situation, right? No, never let a good crisis go to waste. There have been some really good things that have come out of this, and we're not too far gone that we can't turn it around, but it is going to take some work on everybody's part. Again, I mentioned tree preservation really is the first line of defense. The other piece of that, the other component of that is an aggressive planting plan. And that's something that the city has never had a good tree planting plan, and still to this date does not have a very good tree planting plan. We managed to plant a few hundred trees a year, and we need to be more along the tune of thousands of trees a year. We should be planting probably about 5,000 trees a year. So where we're at, I'm trying to think here, the next probably most important piece of information to understand is that the city of Eugene, we focus on street trees, right? We only maintain public trees. 75% of the forest is actually on private property. And that's, in a lot of cases, really where the best planting sites are. Those are the sites that are going to hold the biggest trees. Our focus right now is to get all of our available, we have probably 15 to 20,000 vacant planting sites in the right of way right now. And that really is our first plan of attack, is to get those filled, and we're slowly chipping away at that, and hopefully we'll be getting some more funding for that moving forward. I mean, it has been recognized at this point by city council and a lot of the decision makers that this is something that's important, and we're kind of at a decision point right now. Something needs to happen, otherwise we're going to, if we wait another 10 years, we're not going to be in a very good spot. So that's kind of where we're at right now. On our end, the Climate Action Plan 2.0 that was adopted a few years ago had some 6 very specific actions that were listed for urban forestry, and we're well into these actions. Updating the management plan was one. Getting to that 30% canopy cover is another. There's a whole list of actions that really need to happen to make to see this to fruition, and so we're chipping away at those. But we do need to start partnering with folks and seeing what can we do to get more trees on private property. How can we help invest in private property? We do have some partner agencies that are wanting to do things like tree giveaways. But I wanted to talk to you folks about that, just to see, I guess I should say this, my biggest thing here is I don't want to just spout out a bunch of information. I want to make sure you're getting the information that you need. So at some point I would like to have a discussion and just start answering some questions. The other piece, in fact, maybe we should just go with that. Maybe we should just do a check-in really quick here to see if, do we have questions at this point, or?
We've got loads of questions. People are super excited. I didn't want to cut you off, but I just did want to say thanks, Eric. Like I said, I mean, what other community are you going to get this excited about a single tree? Like, people came out of the woodworks calling I don't know how folks got my cell phone number. I don't give it out. Sure. But yeah, I mean, people are just so thrilled about the prospect of retaining trees, but also about working together. So for y'all to say, hey, we have this instrument, we're going to use it. It's a fancy tree testing tool. I mean, people thought the city wasn't listening. And so you just, you made a huge difference. Even if you do need to take the tree down, knowing that the community spoke and y'all listened is huge. And I'm super excited about the prospect of working together, not only on tree preservation, but planting more trees. I feel like the neighborhood with the most hodads per capita is probably a good place to start for planting more trees. I've put a little note in here. Claire took herself off of the queue, but Angie and Claire also wanted to talk about more information about the Friends of Trees Get a Tree program. So maybe a good place to start before you jump into questions is, are they one of the organizations that y'all have worked with about having more private residences plant more trees?
So we actually, one of the things that we do, we actually have essentially like a neighborhood community enhancement grant. Long story short, it's a contract. We have a contract with Friends of Trees, and we provide them with about, I think the current contract right now is about $75,000 a year, and that subsidizes the trees. So if you have a planting space in the right of way or in your front, they also do front yard trees. That's one of the really nice things. They'll do trees in the right of way. They'll do trees in the front yards. And if you call them up, if the tree is going to be planted in the right of way, it's at a very discounted rate. I think it's about, the last time I checked, I think it was around $40, and they actually will plant the tree. I mean, you can't even buy a tree that cheap if you go to a nursery. It's really a good deal. And they're already dialed into all of the, the approved species, the planting requirements, the size requirements for the planter strip. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's really a good deal. And essentially the city is picking up the other piece of that. And then the thing that they ask is that you help water the tree to establish it. That's a big deal. That's the really expensive part for us. So just to let you know, we have to water trees for about 3 years to establish them. If the cost is just to plant the tree, if we just used our contractor to make it simple, the cost to just plunk the tree in the ground is about $150. The cost to water it for the 3 years, that brings it up to almost $500 per tree. That gets pretty expensive, but that's what we have to do to make sure that they're established, right? We don't, unlike a forest situation, we don't overplant and then just count on attrition that, okay, well, some of these will live and that's what we're stuck with. We actually want every tree that we plant to live, because there was a lot of work that went into that. There's a lot of carbon. It's actually surprising, the carbon footprint on a small tree, they're not actually carbon neutral until they're about 40 years old. So think about that for a moment. That takes a while. They need to, there's a lot of diesel, a lot of carbon that goes into growing those trees, shipping those trees, moving those trees. So right, we plant a tree, we want it to count. We don't want to lose that tree in 10 years. Because frankly, at that point, we were better off not planting the tree if we're just looking at ecosystem services, completely disregarding the connection with trees. So that's something that's really important. We want those trees to survive. So yes, absolutely. Friends of Trees is a wonderful partner. We, in fact, we met with them today. We meet once a month. We've been partnering with them for almost 10 years now. They're a great organization. And then of course, if folks just want to plant the tree on their own, that's perfectly fine. We do have an approved list. We want folks to plant off of that. But on the other hand too, we've just expanded that to about 150 trees. I mean, it is our goal when we made that list was to have, we were a bunch of plant nerds in our department. We're a bunch of tree lovers, and we wanted to have the most comprehensive and diverse list in the Northwest. And I can confidently say we've done that. I mean, people see our plant list and they're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Even landscape architects are like, wow, you guys have a great list. That's what we want, because we need diversity in the forest to make it a healthy forest. And we want to bank. We all the models right now say that the climate is going to be trending towards a much warmer summer and a wetter climate, but we don't want to just be planting like Mediterranean trees. We want to have a good mix of things that if we do get into really extreme weathers, can handle cold, can handle things like snow load, but it can also handle things like extreme heat. And so we're just trying to bank on that, but we have a really comprehensive list. In fact, if you looked at our list, there isn't a nursery in town that would have all those trees, right? So that's what we want. We want people to be able to find these trees. No matter what nursery you walk into, they'll have something that's on our list. They won't have everything, but they will have something that's on our list. So, and we did put a lot of thought into that. We're looking for trees again that are lower maintenance, likely to survive a fairly wild climate over the next 50 years. But we're also looking for trees that some trees are really bad about causing like sidewalk damage, right? They're just really nasty surface rooters. And now once we started talking about repouring concrete, that carbon footprint goes way up. So we want to avoid that type of stuff too. So, we're pretty picky about things that go in the right of way, and those are the reasons why. Largely, we just want to help people get a tree that'll work for them, but we are pretty picky about that list. We, typically when trees get planted that are not on the list, we have a conversation with the person and say, hey, we'll either swap out an approved species, but basically if it's something that's going to be really problematic, we just say, look, you can't plant it, basically. Doesn't happen very often, but it does come up every once in a while. Somebody wants to put a sequoia in like a little 5-foot spot, and we can't do it. But most trees can be planted for sure that you would find in the local nurseries. Other options right now, well, perhaps maybe we should go back to questions. I'm assuming that I have the information that you want, but I really would prefer to hear the questions that you have.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, there was so much there, and I'm just like really excited to continue the conversation. we're over time right now, but we have a couple more questions. I'm going to cut myself off. So the three questions that we have time for are Stephen, Delinia, and Jen is going to be our last word, but I hope this is certainly not the end of the conversation, because there's funding streams that we can access. There's volunteers that are part of the community council, so that we keep the conversation going. And it's not just, you know, complaining about a tree, but also having a conversation about how we work together. So I'm excited to keep the conversation going, and we'll go to Stephen next, and then Delinia, and then Jen. Stephen?
Eric, hi, good evening.
Hello.
Three things. First off, one, thank you so much for the rapid response on this particular tree. It was incredible. I have never seen anything like that before. Secondly, over the last year or so, there have been some very interesting maps of different cities across the country overlaying shade with income. And I think it is quite startling that Ian was telling us earlier this evening, it's that the Whiteaker by far is the lowest income neighborhood in Eugene. And yet the fact that we have shade canopy significantly higher than the average of the city is just a testament not only to the alluvial soils, but to 50 years worth of passion for trees. And I think that's incredible. My question is, you mentioned earlier that about 5 years ago, you started talking about equity. How does shade equity affect your policies and the things that you do currently in Eugene? What are you doing to manifest shade equity?
So I'm really glad that you asked that. So we've already seen it, right? It was already talked about tonight, the difference between what's happening at Washington Jefferson and what's happening at the field there at 14th and 14th and Garfield, excuse me. There's no shade there. That's a real problem. We also have, we know in Eugene right now, so I've just put a link in the chat. I would encourage everybody to just kind of to visit that at some point when you can, but that is basically our planning tool that we have. So it's our canopy cover tool. It doesn't just give us a static view of canopy cover, but it also talks about social equity when it comes to canopy cover. We can actually highlight down to, we can do neighborhoods, we can all get down to almost not quite lot line level, but basically like census blocks, which is like half of a city block, in some cases, down to that level on things like canopy cover, but also there's their tree equity score, right? There's a tree equity score that goes with this that factors in human health. I wish I need to come back and do a demonstration of this because I just put a really powerful tool in the thing, and there needs to be some instruction about how to use it. So I would love to come back and chat with folks and just demo this. I think it'd be awesome. But we can figure out, we can single out vulnerable populations. We can single out where the prime or high priority planting spots based on all sorts of things. That can be the heat island effect, right? We know that in Eugene, the hottest part of Eugene is actually the 99 corridor. Again, if I had another hour, I would love to show you this, but I don't. So you're just gonna have to kind of bear with me. And this was not scripted. I totally didn't have time to prepare this too, so I'm winging this. But we can figure out, I mean, there's just multiple aspects. And that's something that we want to do. We want to focus our planting in areas that are underserved because we now have folks that are paying the most for heating and air conditioning, right? I mean, trees provide shade when we don't have that in these areas. Now we have sometimes the people that are the least able to pay these exorbitant bills are having to pay these exorbitant bills because we're not focusing our tree planting there. That's got to stop, right? That's got to change. So we actually have the tools now that we can prioritize based on these certain criteria where these resources need to be distributed. And it doesn't make sense to plant trees in South Eugene. South Eugene has a 60% canopy cover. There's parts of the Whiteaker that have a 0% canopy cover. It doesn't make sense for us to be focusing any efforts in tree planting in South Eugene right now. All those efforts need to be largely focused in the 99 corridor and West Eugene. We really have these awesome tools at our disposal, so it makes it much easier than it used to be, and it also makes it harder to not spread things out equally, right? We have the information now, so that's a big part of it, and hopefully that's answered your question.
Thank you. It really does. I've been wondering about that. Thank you.
one more interesting tidbit on that too. We know that in Eugene, there's almost a 20-degree average discrepancy between the hottest and the coldest parts of town, the coolest parts in the heat of the summer. We also know that that fluctuates in daytime. We did a really comprehensive urban heat island study. And so they did readings all through town at 6 a.m., at 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. And they realized that the temperature changed throughout the day from all the reflected heat downtown. It actually changes about 20 degrees per day just from the reflected heat. So, I mean, it's amazing the types of influence that the built infrastructure can have on our climate. It's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Stephen, and appreciate the answer, Eric. And the tree plotter canopy is super cool. There's folks in the chat right now wanting to come back for that demo. I haven't broken it yet, but I'm about to. Delinia, you are up next, and then Jen, you're going to have the last word tonight. Delinia?
I think my question is the one that's on everybody's mind. How much of what you decide on a tree has to do with the power lines? Because I've lived in different cities, and I'll be honest with you, I've never seen power lines so low. So, you know, like, how does that affect you guys as far as like what tree to take down?
So we don't do the power line pruning. And that's a little bit of a weird thing in Eugene, right? The power company has an easement basically to prune any of our trees, and they don't even have to ask permission. That's just how it's set up, and it's that way in a lot of cities. I guess from that standpoint is that pruning becomes injurious to trees. I mean, especially, it's one thing if a tree is planted, it still doesn't look good. If it's planted and it grows up with power lines, it can be pruned away from them. That's not great. But when you put power lines in and you're making these massive cuts, you know, an older tree can't compartmentalize that decay fast enough, right? So you have incipient decay that happens. So yeah, there is some damage that happens to city trees from power lines. It's unfortunate. The best thing we can do in those cases is just try to plant a smaller canopy tree, right? So when we talk about canopy cover, the tree doesn't necessarily have to be super tall. It just needs to be wide, a little bit wide. So that's what we do. We try to plant lower, wide trees. Again, it kind of all comes back to this carbon cycle too. I mean, let's look at the tree that's posted right now that we're specifically speaking about, right? The power company comes in and brings it down this way. So the tree only can go this way. Well, our only option to reduce weight is to bring it back in. What do you think that does now to the growth? You see, we just keep ping ponging this problem back and forth. And it's frustrating because it leads to excessive pruning from the power company. And then, you know, now we're kind of, I feel like we're just torturing these poor trees. I really don't like that setup.
Would you suggest for private citizens to contact the city more about the power lines? And
the best at that point, you know, there's not a lot. I guess the place I would call would actually be EO. They would be the ones they're the ones that perform the pruning. It's not something that we have a lot of say in, unfortunately. And that's the other piece we should probably talk about. You know, a lot of folks think that urban forestry really takes care of all the trees in Eugene. We really just focus on street trees, and so there becomes these other decision makers, and we don't always have. We have good working relationships, but we don't have authority. Right? So we have influence at times, but we don't always have authority, which is, you know, frustrating. But that's how it is.
thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Delinia. Thanks, Eric. And Jen, you have our last word for tonight.
Yes, thank you for being here, Eric. We really do want you to come back and do that demo. I'm all over the place, but will they try, if they find that there's sickness or disease with this tree, what kind of tree is it, by the way?
It's a big leaf maple.
A what?
It's called a big leaf maple.
Oh, okay, thank you. Will you make the effort to say if it treated tree? That's one question.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was sorry, you just broke up. I couldn't quite hear.
Oh, will you make the effort to treat it if it's able to be treated and saved?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pruning. The question is, can we prune it? I mean, the tree's not actually diseased; it just has decay. So we wouldn't need to like treat it with any sort of a pesticide or anything like that. We would. The main thing is just, can we get enough weight off of it And my suspicion at this point, we probably can. And I think the real reason that I feel like at this point it's important that we have that resistograph is that we've identified now a tree for removal, and we're saying no, maybe we don't remove it. And so I want to make sure, you know, I don't want anybody to get hurt, but I also don't want to expose the city to like undue liability. So we want to have those resistograph readings so that if we say, hey, we're keeping this tree, we have good evidence why we decided to keep this tree, and it was a justified decision. So that's largely what we're trying to do, if that makes sense.
Thank you very kindly. Also, looking at the trees that they split, you know, it looks like they butcher them. Do you have an arborist that does it? Because there's no artistic application. It's like when you go into the military and they just shave your head off. They don't care what style you want.
Yeah,
it's like painful.
Yeah, no, it's you know, again, I don't want to sound like a bureaucrat. It's built into city code, and it's that most cities have that setup where basically the power, again, it's eWeb's crews that do that pruning. And yeah, it's not a good scenario for trees. I wish that it didn't have to happen. I wish that frankly, I wish the power lines were underground. That would be a much better scenario. Keeps them out of the way for many safety reasons. I mean, you know, sometimes trees fall over on power lines, and now we have to respond to a tree that has energized lines in it, right? So for a lot of reasons, I wish they were underground. But yeah, the utility pruning kind of makes me it's disappointing. It's frustrating. It can be very frustrating to see a perfectly good tree just get hacked. But that's just kind of the parameters that we have. Yeah, there's not much we can do about it, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, I guess. So the thing is that we all have to learn to live with Mother Nature anyway. So my other question is, I don't know if you can do anything about this, but it seems to me that if people build, no matter what it is, that they should have a requirement to put in X amount of trees per square footage that it provides shade, because there's the term concrete jungle is there term for a reason, and it does make things so much hotter. So and then I'll let everybody go.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I'll speak to that. So when development happens and a city tree, like a right-of-way tree, is involved and is going to be either impacted or removed, luckily we built into code that basically that the developer now has to pay the appraised value of that tree. Or if, like, let's say somebody just decides they don't want a city tree and they go out and they remove it without a permit, right? We can actually recuperate the appraised value. And when I talk about appraised value, you think about a big tree, now we're talking $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, right? So that trees can really appraise out at a very high value. I mean, they're essentially irreplaceable. Large tree is irreplaceable, so there's a huge price tag that comes with that. But when we get into development, there is some different criteria. We don't actually regulate trees on private property. The only time that would be regulated by the city of Eugene is a vacant lot that is being developed for the first time. And there is some very loose criteria. It's a weak point. It's a weak point that we need to change, right? I mean, I've already mentioned, right, 75% of the urban forest is on private property. That's the biggest stakeholder right there. So we probably, you know, you look at a city like Portland, they do a lot more regulation on even private trees, and that's a dangerous road to go down when you start telling people what they can and can't do in their backyard. But you know, when we're losing canopy cover at this rate, I'm not really. Again, we can just try to influence folks and you know, get them to like voluntarily plant trees, but outside of enforcement, you know, we can't. There's no enforcement. We don't have authority at that point. So I would like to see when lots are being developed, I'd like to see a lot more trees be preserved. I think that they can be, and it adds instant equity. I mean, you know, a mature tree in a landscape on a brand new house can really add value to that. I mean, you know, I know homes are expensive as it is, but it's, you know, if we did a better job retaining trees during development, we'd be in a much better situation.
All right, thank you very kindly for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you so much, Eric, and to everyone else who stayed far beyond our normal time to be able to continue to engage in this conversation. Eric, I'll follow up via email, but I'm so thrilled at the prospect of continuing to work together and looking for ways that we can really bring more attention to the opportunity of increasing our canopy and really being able to leverage the huge amount of work, it sounds like, to think about the overlaying importance of equity, how to be able to resource trees so they live and they, the amount of carbon that we put into transporting them is really lived up to so they can thrive and exist for a ton of time. And then finally, work together when possible to communicate like, hey, sometimes trees have to get cut down. And I've been like super heartened to hear that conversation on social media. So it hasn't been like, damn the city for trying to cut down our trees. It's like, hey, that's actually important to do because sometimes, if you live through the ice storms, I mean, I'm sure that y'all were surviving on, 10 cups of coffee a day because you were just cruising around town trying to make sure that our city gets back to business. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for going the extra mile and spending a significant amount of time with us tonight on such short notice too, and really excited to continue the conversation around how to be able to kind of communicate whatever decision y'all come to about the big leaf maple, but also communicating, hey, we have a lot more for the urban core of Eugene. South Hills, we're not going to compete with the 40 to 60% of canopy cover they're putting up, but I love the idea of working together to find more opportunities to plant trees and maybe look for your guidance for what are the places that need the most trees in the Whiteaker, and that really we could benefit the most from the work that y'all have put in of creating this strategy, and also kind of leveraging the resources that are out there from community-based organizations, whether they're Friends of Trees or others, so that we can increase tree canopy and really steward the next big leaf maple, right? That's going to outlive us all, and that we won't need to trim because of power lines, because it's placed in an area where it can grow to its fullest and provide shade and all those ecosystem services. So really wanted to say thanks so much, Eric. Really looking forward to continuing the conversation with you, and we'll find a time when you can come back and you can teach us where's the place that we should be planting the trees and who we should reach out to as well. So just wanted to say we're going to have a board of directors meeting next week that's open to the public. We'll have a public comment section in the beginning. Mostly it's going to be the contractors for the WCC presenting on what we're doing. Our ad hoc committee for the charter led by Jen and Delinia, who's our treasurer, are going to be speaking. And then we're going to have a couple of potential items for discussion and vote related to grant expenses. So just wanted to say thanks again for joining tonight, and please join us next week or in 2022 for our general meeting in January. Cheers, everyone. Hope you have a great night.
Thank you.
Wow.